Holy smokes. Okay, you're not going to believe what has happened in Parliament today. The entire system is collapsing. Canada's democracy, as we know, is absolutely imploding, and you're going to see everything unfold in this video. So I want you to buckle up. I want you to stick around for the full thing to actually understand the context, because it gets extremely gnarly. But before we get into it, I do want to encourage you guys to smash the like button and subscribe to the channel, because it does really help with the growth. And without further ado, let's get into it. The entire political system, as we know, is absolutely breaking in front of our eyes. I can't stress that enough. You see, today is supposed to be the day where they table a motion of non-confidence, and the Liberals and the NDP are trying to block that. And today is Opposition Leader Day, so Pierre has every right to actually table this, and he's almost getting filibustered. This is crazy. It's bananas. It's unprecedented. So what we're taking a look at right now, Pierre is finally getting the opportunity to table it. So here we go. Buckle up, smash the like button, and subscribe. This is likely going to be one of the craziest days in Canadian politics. Here we go.
The honourable member for the honourable leader of the official opposition.
Today in a spirit of non-partisanship, to put our differences aside and take a good idea and a good perspective, no matter where it comes from. You know, too often in this place, we refuse to accept ideas or input from other people. And so I thought I would remedy that by taking the words and the message of the leader of the NDP, putting them in a conservative motion, so that all of us could vote for the very wise things that he said. So allow me, in the spirit of this nonpartisan spirit, to read off the motion that we have here. Common sense conservative motion, whereas the leader of the NDP said he has ripped up his supply and confidence agreement with the Liberal government, whereas the NDP leader said the Liberals are too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interests to fight for people, whereas the NDP leader said the Liberal government will always cave to corporate greed and always step in to make sure the unions have no power. And he said that in response to the Liberal Labour Minister's referral to the Canadian Industrial Relations Board that ordered the workers of Teamsters Canada Rail Conference and the ILWU 514 to resume their duties, violating their right to strike. Therefore, the House agrees with the NDP leader, and the House proclaims that it has lost confidence in the Prime Minister and the government.
There we go, ladies and gentlemen. There it is. It's tabled. The non-confidence.
Thank you. We all applaud the NDP leader. I know that he is enjoying the praise we're giving him. So let's go through point by point, as I know the member for Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry, will take up as I'm splitting my time with him. But let's go through point by point to prove the charge of the NDP leader. He says the Liberals are too weak. Well, he's right about that. The economy is weak, having lost $500 billion of net investment out to the United States, having shrunk the last 8 quarters in a row on a per capita basis, having seen the productivity per hour worked in Canada drop for 6 quarters in a row. Our economy is now smaller than it was 10 years ago, and we've gone from having median incomes equal to American median incomes to the present, where the American worker makes $22,000 more. Our economy is shrinking in per capita terms. The cost of living is out of reach. We have 2 million people lined up at food banks. We have double the housing costs, the worst housing price inflation in the G7. Vancouver and Toronto are the most expensive housing markets on planet Earth, in all of North America. And so we recognize that economically, the Liberals have made the country weak. And then there's politically weak. Right. This Prime Minister has lost the support not only of Canadians, who overwhelmingly want to fire him, but of his own party. In fact, the Liberal leader in Ontario has said that his carbon tax is wrong. Right. How could she not say that? It will quadruple over the next 5 years. Bringing economic nuclear winter to our country, emptying our shelves of groceries, driving even more people into starvation. Then the Liberal Premier of Newfoundland has said that the Prime Minister's energy cap will kill jobs in that province. And then 20 Liberal MPs want to fire him. But it's also gone to his own cabinet. You know, right in the middle of a potential trade dispute with incoming President Trump, you would assume that the foreign minister of all ministers, if she were to appear in the New York Times, would be doing so to fight against the tariffs. But instead, she was in the New York Times with the following headline: New York Times tapped by the Prime Minister to steer foreign affairs. She's now
You see your photo right there?
successor.
Here, let me show
That
you.
is the foreign minister.
Point of order from the Deputy House Leader.
He's not even remotely good at what he's trying to do. You know he's trying to use a prop, Mr. Speaker.
No.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition, I'll just remind him to keep that down.
Mr. Speaker, for him to dismiss the foreign minister in that way is outrageous. The reality is she's the one who chose to go to a photo shoot in a studio with the New York Times in an article about how she is the possible successor to her own boss. So you would expect a foreign minister, of all ministers, would be busy fighting tariffs with our biggest trading partner. Instead, she's fighting to replace her boss. On penserait qu'une...
You might think that a minister of foreign affairs would be working hard to prevent tariffs. But instead, she went to the New York Times for a long article which spoke of her as a possible replacement to her leader. That shows weakness.
The leader, the Liberal Prime Minister, is weak. Is he selfish? Well, Mr. Speaker, what else could you call it? When he's treated himself to illegal vacations to private islands, when he's lavished himself with constant gifts and benefits, when he's shut down Parliament numerous times to cover up scandals, while he's refusing to allow Canadians to see, to have accountability for the $400 million missing dollars in the Green Slush Fund scandal, and while he protects his own trust fund from the tax increases he imposes on everyone else, one can only think that this is selfish. And while most of all, he stays in power, even seeing the devastating consequences this is having on the lives of everyday Canadians, that is nothing if not selfish. And then we move to the charge that the NDP leader makes that the Prime Minister is attacking the rights of workers. Mr. Speaker, of this there is no doubt. We see the leader of the NDP. He's gone to rallies at places where courageous workers are striking in order to recuperate many of the lost wages that have resulted from government-induced inflation. Exactly. We know we had more strikes last year than in any year since 1983, a 40-year high. We have, of course, Canada Post workers on strike, doing that strike now lasting a long time and doing incredible damage to small business. Hopefully it will come to an end soon, but the NDP leader showed up at these strikes and said, and I quote, "If there is any vote in Parliament that in any way impacts your rights, we are going to vote no. I can tell you right now, we'll vote no, whether that vote is a confidence vote or not, whether that vote triggers an election or not. I'm telling the Prime Minister and the Liberals right now, you're never going to count on us if you're going to take away the rights of workers. Never," he said, Mr. Speaker. What a powerful statement. Never, and absolutely categorical. So surely he would vote on this motion, keeping his word to those workers, or was he looking them straight in the eye and telling them a plain falsehood? Will he go back to them after this vote and tell them that when it came down to putting his vote where his words was, he just didn't have the courage, that he was under too much pressure, that the fear of losing an election and facing the voters and facing the music for his own record was too much for him, and therefore he backed down and he turned his back on those workers and left them out in the cold? Is that what he's going to tell those union workers, Mr. Speaker? Right. And if so, how will they ever believe anything he says to them again? Right. The answer is that they, of course, could not. But if the NDP leader does decide to vote against his own words, it will mean two things. One, that he does not want to take responsibility for his own record. He doesn't want voters to have the ability to judge his record and his plans, because he fears that they will render a verdict that is not in his favor. The second thing it will reveal is that in the next election, there are not 5 parties running, there are not 4 parties running, there are 2 parties running.
That's right.
There is the NDP Bloc Liberal coalition that tax your food, punish your work, double your housing cost, unleash crime and chaos in your community, or common sense conservatives who will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. That is the choice.
That's right.
It is a binary choice. You vote for the NDP, you get the Liberals. You vote for the Liberals, you get the NDP. You vote for the Bloc, you get both the NDP and the Liberals. And if you are among the grand majority of Canadians who is unsatisfied with the downward spiral of our country, with the broken borders, broken immigration system, broken economy, if you want to bring home Canada's promise again and restore a country where hard work earns a powerful paycheck and pension that buys affordable food and homes in safe neighborhoods, where anyone from anywhere can do anything in the freest nation on earth in Canada, then let's bring it home.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member from the Conservative Party, Mr. Speaker, the leader of the Conservative Party would be laughable if his hypocrisy wasn't so ridiculous. He stood up right now in his opening remarks and exposed himself. This man has never been to a picket line. He called it a rally for striking workers. This leader fought aggressively against card check legislation. He was one of the loudest supporters of the anti-union Bill C-377. He also is proudly one of the loudest proponents of the U.S. right-to-work legislation. So my question is simple. Despite all of his cosplay, we've seen he can't even put on a high-vis vest. Has this member ever once in his life actually visited a picket line?
Bro, what does that have to do with anything?
To answer.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate.
Yeah, put some W's down for Pierre. Come on. Has he ever visited a picket line?
Reprise.
He has.
The honourable member for Stormont, Dundas,
What an idiot.
Glengarry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's always an honour and a tough act to follow when the Leader of the Opposition and Canada's next Prime Minister.
Order. So it was just getting a little noisy there. I wasn't hearing what's going on. We have a point of order from the Honourable Deputy House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I'm trying to listen to my
Shut up, nerd.
colleague. He's trying to give a speech, but his own colleagues are heckling him. Could you ask them to stop so that I could please hear the honourable member?
Thank you.
He sounds
I beat you to it. I
pathetic.
apologize for beating you to that there was getting a little too noisy in the chamber. So I want to make sure that the honourable member for Starmount, Dundas, South Glengarry has the full...
Please, Mr. Speaker. Please do something. We're getting destroyed. Please.
Until I see I have the full attention of the House, I'm just going to stand here and wait.
I need my safe space.
The honourable member for Stormont, Dundas, South Glengarry.
It is always an honour and a tough act to follow the Leader of the Opposition and Canada's next Prime Minister. And sorry for the noise on this side of the House, but we are fired up for a carbon tax election that the NDP have the opportunity to do today. We are going to have on the floor here now debating and calling the NDP out. The Leader of the NDP is so mad he's had enough here. Let's listen and let's just recall again what he said just the past few months alone. He said that he had ripped up his coalition agreement with the Liberals. He said he was fed up. He said, quote, the Liberals are too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interest to fight for people. And he also said, to continue again, quote, the Liberal government will always cave to corporate greed and always step in to make sure the unions have no power. And that was in response to the Liberal Labour Minister's referral to the Canadian Industrial Relations Board that ordered the workers of Teamsters, Canada Rail Conference, and ILW 514 to resume their duties, violating their right to strike. The NDP leader talks a tough game. Out at press conferences, on Twitter, on X, on Facebook, social media. He goes in question period and pretends to be outraged. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to test that outrage. If he's truly had enough, It is time to vote non-confidence. And we are saying, therefore, the House simply agrees. Conservatives simply agree with the NDP leader. We are fed up with this Prime Minister. We are fed up with this NDP Liberal government. Enough is enough. Back your words up with action and vote to have non-confidence in this government. It's time for a carbon tax election. The question is, will the NDP finally do that? I have a feeling, though, from what we've heard in the last couple of days, Mr. Speaker, is the NDP won't do that, because they claim all the wonderful things that they're getting done for Canadians. They just need more time. They need more runway to prop the Liberals up. The coalition agreement was not ripped up. After that little stunt and photo op, he taped it back together piece by piece and handed it right back to the Prime Minister. The sellout leader of the NDP has done it again. Time and time again, even this week when we put the NDP's own words into a motion, all that tough talk, they're sitting and going to prop the Prime Minister up again. And that, let's make it very clear, Mr. Speaker, it is not because the NDP are getting things done for Canadians. It is because the record of what they have done, the true record, the record that Canadians know, that they are just as complicit with the miserable last few years that millions of Canadians have faced. Let's think about it. 2 million visits to food banks in Canada now per month in this country. The Feed Ontario report came out. 1 million Ontarians are using a food bank now in this country. We know that the Daily Bread Food Bank in Toronto says 10%, 1 in every 10 Torontonians are using a food bank. And for the NDP to sit here and say they support workers and they have their back, they have sent, under their record, under their doubling of housing, rising food inflation faster than we've seen in decades, a carbon tax that goes up and up and up and is going to be quadrupled still yet. All these stats. And we're seeing workers hurting more than ever before in my lifetime and in beyond. 18% of food bank users now are workers, saying employment, they are working, but they can't afford to make ends meet. Workers can't afford their mortgages or their rent that have doubled under the watch of the NDP Liberals. Look at crime. The increasing gun violence, over 100% increase in gun and gang violence in this country. Auto theft through the roof under their watch after 9 years. Time and time again, Mr. Speaker, when you look at every part of their record, it's not delivering for people, it's hurting for people. And that's why the hypocrisy of what the NDP are doing here, but putting their own words into action. If they're so outraged at how bad this Prime Minister is, all the things that are happening in this country, if they are upset on their rights of labor and unionized workers to be able to strike, if they truly met what they said outside this chamber, if they truly met what they said during question period and debates, when the question gets called and we have to stand, they should easily say what millions of Canadians want them to finally say. They do not have confidence in this Prime Minister. Vote non-confidence and have a carbon tax election. But they won't. And here's the thing, in a carbon tax election, let's just think about the NDP and where they're at. I think I've lost track of the numbers. I think it's 28 was the last time I heard. The number of times the NDP voted with the Liberals to prop them up in confidence votes and budgets and estimates and everything else in between. And every single time that plan supported the carbon tax and supported their plan together, along with the Bloc Québécois, to quadruple the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre. Well, funny, around the end of summer, a by-election comes in an NDP riding in Winnipeg. All of a sudden, I think the NDP leader was hearing it at the doors with his candidate about just how unpopular the NDP has become by propping this Prime Minister up and by quadrupling the carbon tax. He came out and said the NDP no longer support the carbon tax and they support something else. Didn't say what that was. The by-election's over. They eked through. Their margin shrunk drastically. And no sooner did the NDP leader flip-flop on the carbon tax, he flip-flopped on his flip-flop now, and he's voting again with the Prime Minister and the Liberals to prop them up, prop the carbon tax up, and prop up the quadrupling of the carbon tax. It's like political wilderness the NDP's in right now. They say they don't support the carbon tax after they did support the carbon tax, and now they're back to supporting it by propping the Liberals up, but they won't say what their plan is instead. It's like being in the political wilderness, and the only time they come out of the forest is to vote to prop the Liberals up, and they run back in again. That is exactly what they have been doing for years. And guess what? The reason they don't want to have an election is they know that they're on the wrong side of Canadians. Because there are two choices. There's not 5 or 6 different options in the next election. There's going to be 2. Because it's the Liberals, it's the NDP, it's the Bloc, and it's the Green Party that think the carbon tax is doing wonders. It's when you tax a farmer that grows the food, you tax the trucker that ships the food, you tax the stores that sell the food with the carbon tax. Nothing contributes to inflation. It all is just made up in Canadians' heads. Canadians know better, and that's why they are desperately, desperately avoiding a carbon tax election. It is the leader's record of the NDP on Labour that is absolutely hypocritical. We go time and time again. He said, I want to read a quote just from about 1 month ago. He said, quote, if there is ever any vote in Parliament that in any way impacts your rights, speaking to union members on November the 12th last month, we're going to vote no. I can tell you right now we'll vote no. Whether that vote is a confidence vote or not, whether that triggers an election or not, I'm telling the Prime Minister and the Liberals right now, you're never going to count on us if you're going to take away the rights of workers. Never. He said that last month. Our motion calls that out today. It is not a game to vote for non-confidence and to have an election and to say enough of this Prime Minister. What is political games is voting against this, the NDP voting against their own words and they're not matching their actions with the rhetoric they've said for the last while. But Mr. Speaker, I want to wrap up today, and I want to say to Canadians, my part of Eastern Ontario across this country, things are not good right now. The numbers and the stats we are showing are difficult to hear. We have to spend a lot of time talking about doubling of housing, food inflation, food bank use, drug overdose deaths. But Mr. Speaker, I want to provide a message of hope. It was not this bad before the NDP and Liberals came in, and it will not be that bad after we give them the boot. I'm thinking today in this motion, it's not just about the NDP. It's about the 30-something-year-old that's stuck in their parents' basement. We're going to build new homes by axing the GST on new home sales under $1 million. For the 47,000 Canadians that have lost their life to drug overdoses, Mr. Speaker, treatment and recovery, not the legalization of hard drugs. We're going to give a country that we knew, restore the Canada we know and love, Mr. Speaker. It's time for the NDP to get with the program, call an election, back up their words. Let's have Canadians finally have their say.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire.
Man,
Deputy House Leader.
Pierre and his crew are good.
When the Leader of the Opposition was speaking moments ago, he said Liberals, with the help of the NDP, have overpowered the rights of workers. Can the member explain what he meant by that?
Member for Stormont Dundas South Glengarry.
It is right exactly, Mr. Speaker, in the motion. The NDP is calling out the Liberal failure, the Liberal Minister of Labour, for what he has done when it comes to not respecting the right of union workers to strike. It is that minister and that Liberal government that's answered the question that took away their right to collective bargaining. They talk a big game and their actions speak completely different. It's time now for the NDP. If they're going to call the Liberals out and say how bad it is time to respect union workers. It's time to respect the collective bargaining process. It's time for the NDP to back their words up with action. The tough rhetoric out of the microphone and in question period, it's time to do that when it comes to a vote and it comes to a carbon tax election.
Oral questions.
Oral questions. Questions orales. Honorable Leader of the Opposition, soon to be next Prime Minister of Canada.
Hey, weak men create hard times, and this week,
or not,
Minister's inflationary deficits gave Canadians the worst standard of living in over 40 years. The finance minister promised one of her fiscal guardrails would not be going over her deficit, which is $40 billion. In fact, the PBO said she blew right past it. Simple question, what's the deficit?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what my honourable colleague fails to point out is that Canada is projected to have the fastest growing economy in the G7 next year. He fails to point out that we are creating jobs at a near record pace. He doesn't understand that wages are increasing faster than inflation. His strategy for the economy is to make cuts to the programs that are supporting people, cuts to the programs that are building houses. He's opposing, ironically, the tax cut that would deliver relief to families over the holidays. We're going to focus on growing the economy in a way that works for everyone, not the Conservative approach to cut the supports that families need.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
He could have just said he doesn't know, like he doesn't know where the million people he lost went. And even this number-challenged Prime Minister admits every new dollar of his handouts make his inflationary deficits worse. He says he's going to leave the economy to the bankers, that he doesn't think about monetary policy. And he said budgets balance themselves. It's the same incompetence that made Canadians bank broke, building broke, and belly broke. Canadians want to know how broken the Liberal deficit is. What's the number?
Way to go, Jack!
That's all we want to know.
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
My honourable colleague seems to have a penchant for alliteration and personal insults, but what he lacks is an ability to advance policies that will grow the economy or actually help people in need. Mr. Speaker, at every opportunity, they oppose the investments that are creating jobs in this country. They oppose the investments that are building homes in this country, and they oppose the measures that are going to provide tax cuts to middle-class families, to low-income families, to workers in this country. For once, I wish we could have a debate about the issues instead of stooping to these lows where they throw insults instead of advancing policies that help real people.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Here's a common sense policy that common sense Conservatives will bring in when his constituents fire him after the next election.
Yeah.
We're going to axe the tax for good for everyone. And these deficits that this Prime Minister keeps making sent over 2 million Canadians into a food bank in a single month, made 1 in 4 Canadians skip meals, and sent 1 in 5 kids into poverty. But the Finance Minister said all of them are just feeling a vibe session. Look, if she's not going to release her economic statement, will she at least tell Canadians how bad she's going to blow through her deficit?
Yeah, way to go, Jack!
Give us some numbers.
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
I'd like to remind that member that the last time that Conservatives were in government, more than 16% of kids were living in poverty, over 1 million children. Since we've come into government, Mr. Speaker, we've lifted hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty through measures like the Canada Child Benefit, supporting families each and every month with up to over $700, through the National School Food Program, now in place in 4 provinces across this country, helping to ensure kids have food at school. Not to mention an HST GST tax break, Mr. Speaker. We're there for Canadians.
The NDP Liberal Carbon Tax Coalition is delivering Canadians a Christmas nightmare. Canada's Food Price Index report showed that, on average, Canadians will spend $800 more on groceries this year. The Prime Minister's carbon tax is making a dire situation even worse. The number of food bank visits in Toronto are up 1 million people to 3.5 million visits, a 43% increase in new food bank users. Scurvy is on the rise. Food insecurity has surged more than 20%. All Canadians want for Christmas is a carbon tax election. When will this Prime Minister make that Christmas wish come true?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Let's get serious, Mr. Speaker. The very report...
No, Wreck-It Ralph.
Order.
Sounds like his head is full of a bag of nails. Let's get serious, Mr. Speaker.
Let's get serious, Mr. Speaker. The very report that the member's opposite site says that climate change is the greatest driver of food price inflation. It's the same thing Sylvain Charlebois said when he came to committee recently, and the Conservatives have no plan to fight climate change. In addition, we stepped up over the holidays to offer Canadians a GST tax cut. What did the Conservatives do? They opposed. When we step up to help children across Canada get food at school, what do the Conservatives do? They oppose. You want to make Canadians Canadians a Merry Christmas? Step up.
The honourable member for Foothills.
Well, I guess it would take a Festivus miracle to have a serious Prime Minister who understands that when you increase taxes on farmers who grows the food, truckers who move the food, you increase costs of the food. But after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, this is the Christmas list Canadians face. Grocery prices up $800. Price of food inflation is up 36% higher in Canada than the United States. A quarter of Canadians are skipping meals. When will this Prime Minister grant a common sense Christmas gift to Canadians and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
I would like to quote McLevec.
Hey, no phones! Come on!
Bank, and he says,
Mr. Speaker threw a tantrum the other day when the Conservatives had phones out.
Why? And I'm not in the habit of calling people liars. The report he's referring to does not mention that the carbon tax is a factor behind the $800 increase, and certainly does not say that carbon tax will cost families $800 more on food. That's coming from the Chief Security Officer at TD Bank, Mr. Speaker.
Order. The honourable member for Miramichi Grand Lake.
Under this Prime Minister, New Brunswickers continue to struggle and will now have to pay $800 more for food next year. After 9 years, the NDP Liberal carbon tax has caused the price of groceries to skyrocket. According to Food Bank Canada, the number of people accessing food banks increased by 73% the last 2 years. Over 1 million Ontarians are relying on food banks. That's more people that live in my home province. Canadians deserve better. Will the Prime Minister agree that now is the time to call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A reminder that that member and all of the Conservatives have had an opportunity to support the work that we're doing to provide relief to families in New Brunswick and across the country. I look to the National School Food Program, Mr. Speaker. So far, 4 provinces have signed on, meaning over 184,000 kids will receive food at school this school year. More than 1.5 million meals, Mr. Speaker. They could support us with affordability measures should they choose to do what's right, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Grand Lake.
Mr. Speaker, not a single plate of food has been served, and 1.4 million Canadian children living in poverty. The rise in the cost of food is a direct result of the carbon tax. The Prime Minister doesn't understand. If you tax the farmer that grows the food and the trucker that ships it, you end up taxing the family that buys it. Already the NDP Liberal carbon tax has resulted in food prices increasing 36% faster in Canada than across the border. Will the Prime Minister finally give Canadians the carbon tax election now?
So they're bragging about this child food program, but not a single plate of food has been served?
The words. He did hear some people intervening from the far end of the chamber.
How is that even right?
And this was brought up this morning in different meetings, but it's really important for members not to speak while other members are talking.
Can we get a fact check in the comments in the live chat?
That we could have for our members who use the translation devices so that they can hear what's going on in the House.
Food program that feeds bureaucracy.
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just because a Conservative member of Parliament makes something up doesn't mean that it's true. The Minister of the Environment has quoted the actual report that says specifically that the price on pollution is not responsible for the increase in food prices. But if the Conservatives were honest with Canadians and wanted to actually do something to help them with the high cost of food over the holidays, they could support our GST tax break for Canadians that is taking the GST off of essential items, including groceries, Mr. Speaker. If they were honest with Canadians, they would support the school food program that is feeding 184,000 kids. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Once again, the honourable member from Abbotsford. I'm just going to ask him, please, not to take the floor unless recognized by the House so that everybody can participate.
Thanks so much for watching this video. On your way out, I would like to encourage you guys to smash the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.